So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about compound interest. And I'm going to start by reading this quote. This is by Albert Einstein. He said, "Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." And so what does he mean by this? Basically, the compounding effect and the time value of money does not seem like a big deal until you actually do the math and see the effect over a long period of time. In the short run, it doesn't seem like a significant factor, but it's like a snowball, in that a snowball starts off small, but as it keeps rolling down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger in a kind of non-linear way, because the snowball, as it rolls down, has a larger diameter that it's adding onto as it goes down. So the longer the hill is, the bigger the snowball is going to be. And the longer the hill is, you can start even with an extremely small snowball and end up with a huge one at the bottom of the hill. So his point is that if you know about this and can invest and make compound interest work for you, you can end up with a really good financial result in your investing. However, if you end up as a borrower and don't understand compound interest and you end up in debt, it can end up basically ruining you financially. So let's see how it works with some numbers in this Excel file. So I'm going to do a comparison side by side. In the scenarios, if we started off with $10,000, we can either invest it in a way that only gives us simple interest, meaning you just earn 10% of this $10,000 per year. So in the first year, you're basically going to have your original $10,000 plus 10% interest on that 10,000, which is 1,000, and so your total is 11. And actually, let me change the formula. So the formula here is just going to take the cell above, which is this C5 here, plus the C5 times the interest rate. And actually, what it's doing is going to stay on this 10,000 and multiply it by 0.1 and just add this fixed amount, which is $1,000. So let's see if this formula works. So what I would expect in the second year is that we would have this $11,000 from the previous year plus $1,000, because it's a simple interest. It's just going to be calculating interest on the original investment of 10,000. So let's see if my formula works. Yep. And then in this month, it's going to be 13,000. So let's just now apply this formula all the way down. And so we see that at the end of this 20 years, we have $30,000. So not a bad result necessarily. You've at least increased your original capital from $10,000 to 30. But now let's slightly change this and make it compounding. So what we can do is basically take the previous cell above and multiply it by basically 110%. So you will get your original amount, which is whatever you had in the previous period, plus 10% of that. So the first cell is the same because we're starting off at $10,000. But let's see what happens in the next year. So you see that you're earning not only $1,000 on this original $10,000, but also 10% on the extra 1,000 that we earned in the previous year, which is this extra $100. So this is why Einstein kind of was alluding to the fact that, if you don't understand what this is going to do in the long run, then it may not seem like a big deal, because you see here that in the second year, there's only $100 difference. So the naive person might say, hey, compounding, it doesn't really make a difference. But let's see what happens after 20 years. So this effect, where you're basically earning more on each subsequent year because you're kind of building your snowball, as I mentioned, you see that after 20 years, you've basically earned an additional 125% return. So you can see your result is more than double what it is with the simple interest. And so this effect will be even more if we made this into a 30-year. You can see that the ratio is growing even wider apart as time goes on. So this is why basically staying invested for a long period of time is important. That's why we advocate starting your investment plan early and keep it going for as long as possible, because again, the longer this snowball can continue rolling down the hill, the more this compounding effect is going to kind of play out, because you basically are earning on a larger sum in each subsequent period. So now let's do another experiment where we basically, let's say we're saving $10,000 a year, and we are basically going to accumulate this money over 20 years. So just the amount we're going to invest is $200,000. I just summed all of these. It's 10,000 over 20 years is $200,000. And so if we just put it into a checking account, we would only have $200,000 kind of sitting in our bank account. However, let's say we are able to invest it at 8% per year. So clearly this $10,000 is going to have a really big compounding effect because it's going to have 20 years to grow. However, this last year, you're not going to basically, you're just going to have 1 year of return basically to kind of compound. So it's going to be definitely more than 200,000, but let's see how much more. Okay, so let me just show you the formula. So it's basically taking the sum of the current year's investment, so whatever you put in, plus whatever had accumulated by the previous year, and we're multiplying it by our return. And so now let's see what happens when we apply it all the way down. Okay, so we see here that we have close to $500,000, and that is compared to the sum of just the actual amounts we invested of 200,000. So by just using this compounding machine, making sure that we're investing every year, we've more than doubled our corpus of money that we have. While we would have had only 200,000 if we had just kept this all in a checking account. Let's say we put this 10,000 into an index fund, the stock market, it earned on average 8% per year, which is simplified. It's going to be not a kind of steady rate, but just for illustrative purposes, we're assuming that it just earned the same amount every year. We see that we have a pretty outstanding result. And again, if we continued this even further, the sum of this would be 300,000 versus 1.3 million. Okay, so again, the longer this goes on, the better. And if you can get 30 or 40 years, let's say you start saving in your 20s, by the time you're in your 50s, you had 30 years of compounding. And if you've done a good job and been diligent, you could retire by then if you really had a solid plan. And if you were also able to just increase this amount that you put in every year, because when you first start out your career, you may only be able to invest and save $10,000. But as you grow in your career, maybe you're able to bump it to 50,000. And if you do that, you can see how the numbers just explode. So the lesson I'm trying to kind of convey here is to invest steadily and invest early so that you have as many years of compounding as possible. And so actually, let's just finish this off so we can see the final numbers. So it's actually 31 years. Okay, so again, these two numbers to compare, you total of your cash that you earned through your work or whatever, have invested 1.39 million total over these 31 years. And if you had just had a simple plan of investing from the beginning and compounding the money, let's say in a stock index fund, then that 1.390 million is actually going to be in your brokerage account with a $5.1 million balance. And so you can see how, investing again over the long term can take your hard earned cash, and with the success of business in America and the world, you can participate in that and grow this 1.4 million to 5.1 million. Because again, this is not just happening by some magic tree. You're basically taking this money and investing in the success of our society as a whole by investing in the stock market, for example. The stock market represents the business activity, and let's assume you're investing it in an American index fund that invests in American companies. You're participating in the success of those businesses. That's how this money grows. It's not just by some magic. It's because our whole society is basically benefiting from economic growth, and you can financially benefit too. And another note, it does take some self discipline to implement this plan, because this 50K in savings could be a new car, it could be a couple of vacations in the year, it could be extra spending on whatever. You could spend this money too. But if you have a long term view and have this model of compounding growth kind of embedded in your head, then you can forego those other expenditures and instead save it, because you know that after a certain amount of time, it's going to grow into a pretty big and sizable fortune. I would also note that it is better to do the savings early in life when maybe you're much more tempted to spend it on things like cars and vacations and such. So, especially for the young listeners out there, if you can start the savings early, kind of temper your lifestyle expenditures and invest instead, in the long run, that money is going to grow much further than if you kind of splurged in your youth and started saving later in life. Because again, the longer the money is able to compound, the more it's going to grow.